we want you to write down different questions you might have, or really try to connect with what we're talking about and thinking about, if you're teacher candidates, how this could look in your classroom. If you're in-service teachers, how you could use what we're talking about in your own classroom. So we're going to start sharing the screen so that we can get ourselves started. Let's see. In our chat, hold on, we've got lots of things in the chat. High school, Alicia teaches high school biology. Welcome. Celia's social studies and math. And Kathy is an INCS teacher in math with a math gen ed and background at Rogers. Well, again, welcome, welcome. We're glad you're all here. Let's see. Okay, Kathy, can I have you kind of in charge of the chat as we go? Just looking at if people have questions as we go. Can I have that be your responsibility? That would just be kind of fun for us. Are you muted?
Are you talking to Kathy Wilcox?
I am talking to Kathy Wilcox.
Okay, well, I wasn't sure. Yes, I can. Maybe I can do that. I'll try. So
okay, and you can just, hey, there's a question in the chat, and just let us know. That way it's a little bit more, there's some dialogue in there too. I want to welcome you to the Winter Conference. As I said, this conference is supported by Project Impact, which, as Tracy said in the first session, is a federal grant that we received. And Lesson Study, we've had this awesome opportunity to have Lesson Study be a part of the Project Impact grant. And with that, we've been able to have some funding to work on Lesson Study, which we will go into and explain what the heck Lesson Study is. We will define that for you so you understand it better. But we've had the opportunity to work with partnering schools, and Jennifer Fong is one of our teachers at one of our partnering schools, School for the Arts. I am Joanna Weaver, and let's move to the next slide. And our title for today is Using Social Justice with Math and Science Frames to Integrate Students' Critical Reflection. Students' critical reflection. Wow, that's a big piece. And you will learn as a part of Lesson Study that overcoming struggles is a part of the whole piece. And critical reflection of students, that could be maybe a stumbling block for some of us as teachers. So we thought using social justice with math and science frames to integrate students' critical reflection was a perfect title to kind of wrap our entire our lesson, because it's cross content areas. It's not just specifically ELA or math or science or social studies or CTE. It can cross all content areas. Like I said, I am Joanna Weaver. I work at BGSU as the AYA Integrated Language Arts Content Coordinator. I am also a Project Impact co-director, co-leader, as well as a member of the Lesson Study team. And my dear friend, Jennifer Fong, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Jennifer Fong, as I said in it's up on my window. I teach 6th grade English language arts at Toledo School for the Arts. But as we were talking about licensure areas, and I always like to tell my middle school, my 6th graders how old I am. I'm so old that my licensure is really 1-8, and I can teach any subject area. So that was a long, long time ago when I got licensed. But I have landed in middle school and love teaching language arts.
What about you, Gabriel?
And I'll pass it off to Dr. Matney now.
All right, thanks, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. My name's Gabriel Matney, and I am a professor of math education here at BGSU and part of Project Impact. I have a few different research areas that I love to do, one of which is lesson study, and we're going to talk about that more today. So jumping in then, the important thing about a name like lesson study is that sometimes it could be misleading. It kind of gives the sense that all we're doing is studying a lesson or curriculum, right? But that's not really what is meant by the word lesson study, which is a derivation of some Japanese terms, that the Japanese have been working on this for more than 130 years now. And so when they say lesson, though, it's really more like the living lesson, right? The lesson that occurs with an actual teacher, with actual students in real time, and the study of improving the living lesson, right, as it occurs. So maybe a better way of talking about is that lesson study is with teacher teams collaborating together to overcome a challenge that they perceive with student learning. And so they team together and they also bring in a knowledgeable other, someone from outside, the normal school setting, to give an outside perspective to add to the richness of it, to really look at, and we say research, right? Research in the sense that we are observing real students and really thinking about what's happening with them. And then to figure out what's going to work with the students in the learning and why that's going to work. So there's a process well researched and documented over the years about lesson study. When teacher teams do this, what are some ways that they can do it that provides the richest fruit for them? And so we delineate this process in Project Impact as 4 steps: study, plan, teach, and reflect. And so during the study phase is when the teachers come together and they identify, here's a key problem with student learning that we want to overcome together. And they dive in and they study. So that may include them looking at curriculums, actually. It may include them going out and polling teachers, other teachers, and saying, hey, what do you do to overcome this? It may include them looking at state documents like from ODE or professional developments offered by different people. So they do whatever they need to do, and they consider that as a team, and they come together and they bring all that knowledge together, and then they make a lesson plan that they feel will address the issue that they're trying to overcome. Once they're done planning, then they go to this 3rd stage, this stage 3 in red down there, called do research lessons. So in other words, one of the teachers is going to teach the lesson to students while the other teachers are going to observe what's happening with the students. I think a key thing is that they design the lesson as a team. And so when they enact the lesson, they're not evaluating their colleague. They're looking at what happens with students on their lesson, the one they all agreed to, right? And so it really frees us from any feeling of evaluation and more engages us as professionals to say, what is going to happen? We think it's this. Is that really what is going to happen? And so, of course, we hope so. But then we can also be honest with ourselves. It did happen in these ways. It didn't happen in these other ways. So what can we do to revise this lesson to continue to improve our students' learning? Becomes a big question in the reflection phase of lesson study, which is the orange in number 4. And so the teachers reflect on everything. And then guess what? It's back to the study phase, right? What do we do? Joanna and I have been part of lesson studies, even here at BGSU, that we do with BGSU students that are multiple years. So just because you do something 1 year doesn't mean you might be done studying it. Some of the things in our profession are so complex that they require groups of teachers to put their minds to it and think about it over multiple years. So that's kind of a broad overview. Here's some of the purposes that we found in Project Impact. So these are like school districts like Springfield and TSA. They've been doing some of these lesson studies. And so like some teacher teams have said, look, implementing universal design for learning lessons is hard for us. So as a team, we want to work together to work on that. Other teacher teams have said, look, getting students to think for themselves is like really difficult. So we want to work together to overcome that in our lesson study. Others wanted to talk about content proficiency, specifically math teachers. They're like, look, we got to figure out how to get our students proficient here because graduation requirements, dictate that they show their proficiency on an exam. And if they can't do that, they don't get to graduate. And that's a bothersome thing to us. We want all of our students to graduate. So they tried to tackle that problem. And then, of course, there's other things like establishing learning environments, like how do we get a good learning environment going, and then problem solving or critical thinking. And this last bullet point is part of our lesson study today, critical thinking. So I'm going to hand it over to actually the teacher of our lesson study team, Jennifer Fong.
Thank you. And just a little background on the book that we chose. As Dr. Matney said, our real goal at TSA when we started this lesson study process was the challenge we felt with our students was that they weren't always thinking as critically as they could. And I had talked about, this is a book that I've used in my classroom for the last, oh gosh, this will be the 6th year that I've used it. And Hidden Figures, the Young Readers Edition, is a book that for 6th grade really can engender that critical thinking. It's a difficult book to read. It's also, there were other reasons that I chose this. It's cross-curricular. I wanted a nonfiction book in my classroom, and then I'm always at the back of my mind, or really at the forefront of my mind as an English teacher, I also want texts that are oriented around social justice. We have a diverse student body at TSA, and as an English teacher, I feel it's so important that students learn about other people, about other cultures, about other religions. I take a really broad definition of diversity. I also truly believe that the students in my classroom need to see themselves represented in the text that we read. And I teach English a little bit differently. I have a workshop model, so I really only do 2 common texts a year with the students. The rest of the time, we're involved in book clubs and literature circles and independent reading. And so I really thought a long time about the texts I chose. So again, for all those reasons, this is one of the books that I chose. Thanks. I'm ready to go on to the next one, Dr. Matney. And I just wanted to show a couple of the selections from Hidden Figures that when I'm teaching this text, and these were important in our lesson study work too. Again, they hit the social justice theme that we were looking for to engender the critical thinking, and also the cross-curricular, because we had math and science teachers involved in this lesson study research as well. So this book, this particular selection, the accomplishments of these 4 women were remarkable, but their work was even more impressive because it was achieved while living and working in the South during a time when racial discrimination was commonplace and when most women with an interest in math were expected to become math teachers. And again, this slide really hit the work of our lesson study research, but also hits the social justice theme really well. We talk a lot about this and parse out this particular phrase with my students because it talks about dual discrimination. These were 4 African American women who were working and living in the South in a time when the Jim Crow laws were still in place. And so for them to even become a part of NASA was a difficult process, let alone to excel there. And again, if you know that story, their work wasn't brought to the forefront of the public until maybe 2014, 2013 at the earliest. So again, we really discussed this particular passage as a class, and the students, my 6th grade students, and when we do cross-curricular with the math and the science teachers and part of our lesson study work, people were surprised at the discrimination that these women really faced. And again, in particular, they were able to work at NASA, but once they were at NASA, they still had separate lunchrooms, separate workspaces. So it really can engender some critical thinking. I can go to the next one. And then again, this particular selection really spoke to the cross-curricular aspects of our lesson study. I work collaboratively with the math and science teachers, both at the 6th grade level and the 7th and 8th grade level. And this particular passage fit, again, our lesson study work really well in that cross-curricular vein. At Langley, the female mathematicians were called computers. They did the computations to turn the results of the raw data gathered by the engineers into a more useful form. Today, we think of computers as machines, but in the 1940s, a computer was just someone whose job it was to do computations. The other reason, there's really a practical reason too, that I really focus on this particular passage with the sixth graders, because of course, with any student, if we use the word computer, they're thinking of their iPads, their laptops, their cell phones, what we in modern times think of as a computer. And they needed to be reminded that in the 1940s, when these particular women started at NASA, they were called computers because they were doing all the mathematical calculations. So again, this particular passage surprises students, sometimes surprises adults, and fit really well with that cross-curricular aspect of our lesson study. So again, that's why I chose to highlight it here. Again, when we combine this text, the tenets of lesson study, the collaborative discussions we had among teachers and with Dr. Weaver and Dr. Matney at BG, and our students eventually, the students are really afforded the opportunity to think critically about a text. We really dive deep into this particular book, and it's just rich again with discussions about social justice. What was life like in the South for these African-American women during the time? And this book covers a wide time span. It starts in the 1940s and discusses their work all the way through the 1970s and into the 1980s. So we hit that civil rights movement, we hit World War II. And again, through that process of using this text, our lesson study process, students were really able to reflect on their thoughts and questions they had about the book. I see them grow as learners when we use this particular text and the process of lesson study in our classroom. And they really begin to, even as sixth graders, take those beginning steps of taking ownership over their own learning. And I think this is Dr. Weaver's jump-in point.
And I love how you were talking about the reflective process and the students really critically thinking, because I think this is where oftentimes we can see a stumbling block with students really being reflective about their own learning. And so what we were able to do is we used a reflective practice. It's called SOAP notes. And S is for subjective, O observation, A is assessing, P is planning. SOAP notes are primarily, it started off as a medical note-taking tool to write down after you have a meeting or an appointment with a patient, and then the doctor writes down these SOAP notes so that they know the next time they come in, this is what we discussed at the last appointment, and this is what our plan is to help the patient. And what we did then, many adapted the medical SOAP notes and change them into the educational SOAP notes. So you have reflection in practice, on practice, and for practice. So when I brought this, now we have a collaborative team of teachers at Toledo School for the Arts. And when we were talking about, we want students to reflect, we want them to think about their learning, we immediately were like, oh my gosh, we use SOAP notes with instructors and having them reflect on their instructional practice, which actually is exactly what I'm talking about in the next session, which is kind of funny. But we thought, could we use this for students to reflect on their own thinking and their own learning? So with the collaboration of the team, we came up with map notes, because we thought, you know, the SOAP notes might be too higher level for some of the sixth graders, which, well, I'll get to in a second. We actually, after we did it, we thought maybe they could have done SOAP notes. But what we did was we adapted SOAP notes and made them into map notes so that they would think about their mindset. Like when you walked into class, where was your mind? Where was your thinking? Were you really ready to participate in class? Were you really ready to engage, because we have no idea what happened to them before they walked into the classroom. We don't know if they got in a fight with their friends. We don't know if, what, or maybe they came to school and their parents for some reason were mad at them, or the opposite, they were really excited. And so they were, so excited. Could be anywhere on that spectrum. And then also the A is assessment. So having them reflect on what they learned in class and whether or not, a lot of times teachers write their objectives on the board. I was going to say chalkboard, that takes you back a good 30 years. They write the objective on the board and say, this is what we want to accomplish today. Well, the students reflecting on that, and did I learn that today? Where was I struggling? And so if they were struggling, they weren't engaged, if they really didn't get a whole lot out of class, that P piece of planning, what are you going to do next time to make sure your mind is in the right place? What are you going to do next time to prepare for the class discussion? Maybe it's just a matter of doing their homework. It could be something just like finding time. Maybe it's, I need to budget my time better because I'm not getting things done because I'm wasting time on Minecraft or who knows what. But really having them reflect on their own mindset and their own learning during class. That's a question that oftentimes students don't get asked to do, is to reflect on themselves, taking ownership for their own learning. And so this was definitely a jumping off point to get them to further critically reflect on such a powerful novel, such as Hidden Figures. You want to continue, Jen?
Yes, absolutely. And again, I'd like to, I use those map notes now. So we developed those last year when we did the lesson study research. I use them not only when I do the Hidden Figures text, but I bring them out with different things too. It might be a simple grammar lesson. It might be, they've become really important to me when they do engage in their sort of self-guided literature circles, and I get amazing responses from the students. Obviously, I had to take time at the beginning of the year to teach them the form. What does that M mean? What does the assessment mean? But once they have a handle on that, they give as if you work with middle schoolers, you know that they can be really honest, but they will tell me about their mindset. And when they came in, they didn't really want to be in English today, despite the fact that I think, do cool things, or they were really more interested in, as Dr. Weaver said, playing Minecraft. We're a one-to-one iPad school, so the iPads are a blessing and a curse at the same time. So sometimes they'll choose in the middle of class to be on Minecraft, but they'll tell you about it. And then again, in that planning part of the map notes, they admit that, the next time I come into class, I need to not be so interested in Minecraft or whatever it happens to be. So I found them to be really good, almost like that simplifies it too much, but like an exit ticket. I really look at them every day after we've used them to see where was their head, but it also gives you really deep information about the student, as Dr. Weaver shared, what had happened at home in the morning, what had happened to them in the hall, or what had happened to them at lunch with their friends. And then those are things that I can pass along to not just administrators if I need to, and certainly things have popped up, but our guidance counselor. Maybe someone is going through something at home, and then Mrs. Mauer, our counselor, can help that student with that. So they've been immensely important to me as a teacher for many reasons.
Can I interrupt? Because that just made me think of something. That's exactly what they do in the medical field, because they share those notes with other medical professionals. And my daughter getting her doctorate in pharmacy, that's exactly what they do. They still use SOAP notes in the medical field, and they pass them on. And that is the goal of the educational SOAP notes as well, to be able to share and have that dialogue with other teachers. So I love that you're looking at them that way. It's to share with the guidance counselor, it's to share with other teachers, so that we can be as supportive as possible for our students.
Absolutely. It's such a great piece to add to your classroom. And it's much more, I've done check-in forms with students. We do a quick write every day, so they'll tell me things, but this has really given me a lot of important information about them as you know, just not only again in their personal lives, but as readers, as thinkers, as writers in my classroom. And then this slide, I just wanted to share, I think these are some of the comments that I get. These are all from different sixth graders. Some of them I intentionally picked a comment from what I would consider a struggling reader, and some from some of my better students in class, my more, the ones that don't struggle. But I really believe that I'm getting these types of comments and discussions about our text because I've used those map notes and asked them to think and taught them how to think critically, how to self-reflect on things, again, using those map notes. So in particular, the one on the top, you know, World War II changed the world. It opened up jobs for women at NACA, which was NASA before they became NASA, and other companies, because all of the men were fighting in the war. Women didn't want to stop working after the war either, so it changed the traditional ways at home, where mom stayed home and took care of the house and kids. And another student then piped in, yes, I agree. This also gave them more money to spend in their cities, so it changed the economy. Our social studies teacher happened to be teaching economics at the time, so that was a really cool piece that they were able to tie in the other classes, even though they certainly weren't talking about hidden figures in social studies at that time. Again, the bottom one towards NASA thought that they were not discriminating because they hired African-American women, but then they had separate bathrooms and lunchrooms for them. This is discrimination. I know they had to follow the rules in the South, but didn't they realize that was wrong? And I left the quotes as is. We know there should be a question mark there, but that, and this is from one of my struggling students. So he typically scores at the bottom, and I've seen real growth in him last year. And again, the last one, Dorothy Vaughn thought about taking a job at the US Navy Laundry because earning 40 cents an hour was more than she made as a math teacher in Virginia. This would have been in the 1940s. This way she can save money for her kids' education, which was very important to Dorothy. And we actually do our math here because she was going to earn 40 cents in the laundry. She earned 20 cents an hour as a math teacher in Virginia at the time. So again, we can pull in lots of cross-curricular information too.
Jennifer,
But again,
Jennifer, can I ask a question?
absolutely.
So I'm supposed to be watching the chat, so I want to let everyone know that I am doing that. I have a question. I teach, I do inclusion with high schoolers. Mm-hmm. How would you start this? Because I can see the kids saying, I'm not going to do that paper, you know, being really, how do you bring that change into your class and get the participation?
That's an excellent question. And with the group, I think you're trying to bring it in. I can see that as a challenge. At sixth graders are pretty open to it, so I feel I'm pretty lucky there. But I do have some reluctant students who don't want to share their thinking in the beginning. And I think it's just a process of time and continuing to bring it out. I do have students at first that they may leave some of those sections blank. They may choose not to do it, or they give me very surface level thinking, what I think is surface level thinking for especially the mindset, or they might leave the plan blank in the beginning because they don't know what to do to correct whatever it is they think they need to fix. But again, through every time I bring them out, they get a little bit better. And then now we have, because we collaborated with 7th and 8th grade teachers on this lesson study, they're getting the opportunity to use those map notes again as 7th graders and 8th graders. So I think it's one of those things that just takes time and buy-in from the students in the beginning. One of the ways I could sort of hook the reluctant students for filling out the map notes is, it was, I hate to say this because I'm not even a big fan of grading everything, but I gave them a grade. It was a completion grade. If they even had part of it done, I gave them the 4 points I assigned to it. So sometimes you have to put that out there for them, but eventually you sort of win them over. I hope that was responsive to your
Well,
question.
and Jennifer, you also had said, you know, you work them through the process. So I think even having what I do with my students, I have my teacher candidates, college age, not real excited about doing SOAP notes when they're out in the field and doing this extra reflection, but I give them a model of one that's already been done.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I give them some that are pretty simple, you know, to make them realize initially, you know, it's just getting into the practice. And then I love what you said, where you repeat it, you keep bringing it out because you want to have them continue to self-reflect and to be responsible. So I think even doing it as a think aloud, you could do it as a think aloud with them.
Mhm.
Like today, when I came into class, I hadn't had my coffee, you know what I mean? Where it's like, so I really quickly needed to make sure I had my coffee to begin my day.
Yeah.
But talking them through your own think aloud even at the end of class, go, let's think about this. What was the mindset today? And you could have the students contribute. What was your mindset? What
Absolutely.
was your mindset? And do it orally.
Yeah.
And then
I have to do that at the beginning of the year. I turned that form into a big poster, and just like we'll do Socratic seminars in my room too at the very basic level, but I have to teach them those skills explicitly through a lot of modeling, a lot of practice, a lot of discussion. So I'm glad you added that, Dr. Weaver, because I forget to even say it because I just start the year out that way.
And then that thinking becomes almost automatic.
It does.
You want to create automaticity. So if you do that process and do it frequently, then they're used to doing it. It's like, okay, we got this now. And creating that safe environment where they can be honest. They can, and sixth graders are going to be honest no matter what. High schoolers sometimes think they might get in trouble for being too, you know, and giving them that safe place to be able to say, I just wasn't here today. And you saying that's okay. You know, but what can we do for tomorrow?
Yeah, the other thing I teach them, and that's where you see in the one quote, the yes, I agree. At the beginning of the year, I take a lot of time and then we revisit it all year. That language of accountable talk, so that when someone's talking and you want to interject, it's, you know, I want to add on to what Dr. Weaver said, or yes, I agree with what Dr. Matney said. So again, it's just a process that they learn.
I'm sorry, Gabriel, go ahead.
No, I'd like to add something that I think is important in connecting to Kathy's question that relates to the things that we discussed as a lesson study team that were incorporated in the lesson. So one of the most important elements I see related to preparing students to reflect in ways that are going to be beneficial on the math notes was an incorporation by the team and Jennifer here to note that sitting and reading and discussing reading the entire class period may not work the best with sixth graders. But if we incorporate elements of having them do stuff on sticky notes and get up and put it and think and reflect all along the way, it's not just about reflecting here or there, but like every single moment in some sense is a reflection, right? And then discussion of others' ideas, that would be important. And so it's in the lesson. I know we don't have time to dig into it, but I want to say, you know, as someone who both helped with the lesson and also I was one of the observers of the lesson, I found what the students wrote on the sticky notes and then where they had to place them itself was a motivating factor for them to want to talk about it, because they're getting their ideas out there too for discussion and observation.
And I think that's why we could get these really strong quotes here, because it's been building through the year. So the students are, as they go, they reflect more deeply every time. You know, you see a growth in their self-reflections as it continues, and doing those Post-it notes and giving them opportunities to reflect in all different ways throughout helps build this. No, I love it. These are really powerful.
Thank you for adding that, Dr. Matney. I had actually I use sticky notes a lot. And the other reason, some of your quiet talkers who might not talk out loud or make a comment in a discussion, that sticky note acts as a bit of anonymity for them. I don't require most of the time students to put their name on a sticky note unless I'm using it as an exit ticket or something. But so they feel a little bit safer.
While giving them voice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's part of social justice and social justice education. How are we giving all of our students an opportunity to share and have voice in our class, no matter what different backgrounds, differences there are among our students, but giving them that equal opportunity to have voice, but maybe in a different platform.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of voice, and noting that we only have about 7 minutes left, I would like to talk a little bit about the voice of what some of the teachers in this teaching team shared with us after. So as good reflectors ourselves, as professional reflectors, at the end of a lesson study process, you reflect on what happened and how we grew as teachers. And so here's a few things from that. Jennifer said, these are just parts of the reflections because it's just too much text, right? So I just took pieces of it. But Jennifer said, having feedback on how a lesson went rather than how I taught a lesson. That's so important right there. Having feedback on how a lesson went rather than how I taught a lesson allowed me to focus on that process of productive struggle and see how our students work through that process. Another teacher said, it made me think about how students can benefit from really learning to metacognate about their performance. I think if they begin to be more deliberate about doing that, they are on their way to having more power and ownership in the learning process. By the way, this particular team member, Lydia, is an art teacher. So we had a very diverse group of teachers here. This process is by Ryan. This process helps to focus on it should just say the actual content, techniques, and student outcomes of the lesson itself. The fact that we could discuss as a group, I would add, of professionals, aspects of a lesson that we could implement regardless of content areas was pretty invigorating. And so ultimately bringing this to a close here, you can see from the professionals that were involved in this that there was a lot gained. The map notes came out of it. Jennifer already said, I still use those. And I think that's one of the powers of lesson study. Like we lesson studied and we created one lesson together, right? But the effects of that one lesson resonate through not only the students, but they resonate through us as teachers. And then in some sense that affects hundreds of students, and maybe over our careers, we would say thousands of students have better learning because we as a teacher team came together to really look closely at one problem and work to overcome it. So I really appreciate the TSA school of the Toledo School for the Arts teacher teams to be willing to work across content lines to do this lesson. And we were wondering now, do you have any questions or comments for us about the things we described here?
Should we stop sharing for a second so we can see everybody?
Yeah, good call. Good call.
So I just have a curiosity question. At the very beginning of the kind of session, you had mentioned that that term lesson study was kind of derived from like Japanese derivative, like I'm trying to remember what you said exactly,
Yeah.
but those terms, do you happen to know what those were like specifically? I was just curious. I could look them up later, but if you already knew.
Kyozai-Kenkyu. Yeah.
Would you mind putting that in the chat so I could have like some,
Yeah.
trivia knowledge fact away for
Yeah,
later?
let me do it on my other computer so I can still see everyone's faces, but I'll do that while you keep talking. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And that's just one question I had for right now, at least. I'm still looking
Dominic,
through my
we
notes.
appreciate that. Thank you so much for asking that question. Somebody else. I'm doing the virtual pregnant pause. Oh, I don't think I can even say pregnant pause anymore. The virtual pause. Okay, let me ask you a question. How do you see incorporating either lesson study or map/SOAP notes into your classroom? And I know, Kathy, you were talking about that a little bit, like, how can I make this work in my high school classroom? What do you all think?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question really quick?
Absolutely. How do you see this working in your own future classroom or your current classroom, either using the map notes or SOAP notes or using lesson studies specifically?
I would use SOAP notes.
How would you use SOAP notes?
Probably before and after, because didn't you say it shows like their mindset before and then like what they got from it afterwards? So it would help me know what I can improve on.
Okay,
And
so
what they got
so
from it.
would you use it as an instructor, or do you think you'll have your students do it?
Students.
That your students will do a self-reflection?
Yeah.
Okay, okay, wonderful. Yeah, it's a really powerful tool for students. Somebody else.
One of the classes I'm in, we have maybe half the students have us 2 periods in a row. We have a second hour algebra 1, and then third hour is a foundations class for those students who failed concepts algebra. And that would be a perfect class to do a little more reflection, to start it and try it. We're doing Alex in there and some other, so we have some days of notes and some days of Alex and some days of games. But incorporating that might be a good place to start.
I love it. That's a great idea. And I want to hear about it, Kathy. So if you can email us, let me put in the chat. I don't know. I love hearing the outcomes when people try things. Let me put this in the chat. So if you do that and you use it, email us. I don't know, Gabriel and Jennifer, if you want to put your emails in the chat as well, so people can reach out. We would love to hear about how you do choose to use it. Daphne, Alicia, Olivia, what do you all think? Not to put you on the spot. Do you think this is something practical? Go ahead.
Yes, I do think it's practical, and I also think that's important for not only students to reflect, but also teachers after a lesson, even if it's like just a quick 5 minutes before you get your next class, to see if it worked or you need to change something to help you for the next class. So I also think it's important for teachers as well.
Absolutely. My teacher candidates, the reflections we get, we really start doing this their junior year. And by senior year, they're like, oh my gosh, those are so powerful, because it does help them think about what were my challenges and what do I need to do future learning. So I love that you said that, Olivia. Thank you. Celia.
Thank you. What's another way you would incorporate social studies and math in the social justice area and then use it for them to be reflective besides hidden figures?
So many ways. There's obviously the literature, right? That we've talked about here, but there's also ways of looking at data and thinking about the data mathematically and honestly critically, right? Like ways of learning how to be critical of data, what it says, why it says it, and what makes sense to put forth as a reasonable policy change, for example. I think our world is different than it was in a Hidden Figures time. Like it's very clear whenever you have separate bathrooms that something's weird, right? It's like something's weird here. Like it should be very clear. I think I'm not sure it was to everybody back then, but I think from our perspective in 2021 and 22, it's pretty clear that's obvious discrimination. So I think we live in a much more complex world now. So, but we also have more access to data than we ever had too. So the question is, how do we use our mathematical knowledge to really understand data in ways that will help us make better decisions for all of humanity, or each one of us? And so anyway, those are a whole bunch of lessons, right? It's like you can look at a bunch of things and you can think about it from multiple perspectives and really be critical. And I put it out there, critical thinking, as not coming from a particular political perspective, but just the ability to get in and really
Right.
think about what is the data saying, and why is it saying that? And then what are we going to do about it? Right.
Thank you.
Celia, I think that's an interesting question, because if you happen to stay on this link, for the next session, we're talking about using SOAP notes to reflect on social justice within a classroom. And it is because the reflective SOAP notes, that can also be used to look at how you're overcoming any struggle. So maybe social justice, how am I implementing social justice? And is this working? Is this getting students to think about the world around them? And so you can use that reflective practice to kind of look to self-reflect on your own instruction. But you can also use it to see if your students, like if you use the map, you can see if they're reflecting on the social and they're learning about social justice as well. So it works for both. And I think then if you have a team of collaborators and you're like, hey, this is a struggle, how can we implement? So you and a group of your peer colleagues, that could be a struggle that you all try to overcome and create a lesson to implement those social justice issues. Moji, M-O-J-E, I want to say her name's Elizabeth B. Moji. She wrote an article on how to implement social justice into instruction, and really powerful article, but that can also give you further ideas. Any other questions? I know we're kind of over time now by like 4 minutes, I think. You all are amazing. I want to say
Great
thank
questions,
you.
though. Yeah, great.
Yeah,
questions.
wonderful questions. Let's see. Bernie says, I also know there are updated books from you, such as Stamped from the Beginning by Jason Reynolds and Ibernex Kendi, or it's Trevor Noah, Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. They have been adapted for young readers, and many more that will relate to current times. Thank you so much, Bernie. Excellent. Any other questions? All right, so you have to leave this link if you're going into one of the other sessions. I'm staying here because we have a presentation on social justice